Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of our Rural Insights podcast. And I'm delighted to have with us today a friend, a good friend for many, many years, Dr. Charles Ballard, professor of economics at MSU, at Michigan State University, and the author of many books, which I assume you can buy through Amazon after you hear him talk. And if you can't find him, give me a call. I'll get it set up so you know where his books are. But Charlie, glad you're with us today. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
So I'd like to start out sort of with you and I went back and forth a little bit on some of this, and that is first let me ask, I guess, before I do this economic inequality, what's the situation, do you think, with the Michigan revenue stream and therefore the budget? What's your sort of look at this, especially with everything we're seeing with inflation coming on?
Well, there's a temporary story and a long-term story. Temporary because of the various bills that have been passed in the last year to try to recover from COVID. There's a lot of money, and the state government is in the unusual position of having a pretty good revenue situation. But long-term, our revenue system has been deteriorating for years. The fraction of our economy that we devote to state and local taxes in Michigan has been going down for 50 years. And that means less revenue available for supporting K through 12 education, for supporting higher education, for fixing the damn roads, as Governor Whitmer would say, for just a wide variety of social service, for parks, you name it. Our budget has been really stressed. So the long-term situation, I think, is not nearly as favorable as I would like it to be, given all of what I see as pressing needs for investment by the government. But in the short term, because of the infusion of federal funds, it's not as dire.
So one of the obviously for our listeners, we this is about then how do you get more revenue? How do you get taxes? And as I think we all know, Michigan has a very difficult time when they have to take taxes to the voters of passing new taxes, which is a normal inclination. But as the saying goes, somebody has to pay the bills. So, for many years, and for those of you listening, Dr. Ballard has been a major scholar and person that talks to public policy makers about issues of taxation and revenue in Michigan. The inequality gap grows between the rich and the poor, the middle class and the very rich. Dr. Gene Sperling has a great book, Economic Dignity, which writes about the earned income tax credit and how it helps everybody from his perspective. Can you talk a little bit about the earned income tax credit and the graduated income tax ideas, which I think a lot of people believe will help this issue of inequality and will help the state with revenue, I assume?
Sure. As background, really this big increase in inequality began about 40 years ago. It has a variety of sources. Lots of things played into it, some political, some economic. Michigan has not been a very different from most of the rest of the country in that in Michigan, what's happened is the high income have pulled away from the middle, and the very high have pulled away from the high. The middle and the bottom haven't done nearly as well, and that's actually worse in Michigan than in most other states. We used to have a very robust and vibrant middle class, ordinary folks with just a high school education who were earning very, very good wages, and that's been hurt in recent decades. And the people at the bottom haven't done well. So, with that as background, my feeling is that it would be wise to do more to help those at the bottom And if you got to pay for it, maybe wise to pay for it by more from those at the top. So earned income tax credit, that's something that helps people at the bottom. It's different from the old style welfare programs, which just gave cash. The EITC only gives benefits to those who are working, and it is targeted at low income families. Most of the money goes on to low income families with children, relatively little to low income folks who don't have children, but most of it is low income families with children, and you can only get it if you work. And so it is an incentive to work. The evidence suggests that it's had a beneficial effects all over the place. So we have a federal EITC. It was signed into law by Michigan's own Gerald Ford in 1975. And remember, he was a Republican. It was expanded under Ronald Reagan, another Republican, expanded again under George H.W. Bush, another Republican, and expanded at the federal level for the fourth time by when Bill Clinton, a Democrat, was the president. But I say that because it's something that historically has had a lot of bipartisan support. And many states have chosen to top up the federal EITC. Clearly, in Michigan, we don't have any control over what the federal government does, but if we want to augment that, we can. And in 2007, we passed a bill that took your federal EITC and boosted it by an extra 20%. Then in 2011, there was a strong move to eliminate that entirely, which I think would have been a mistake. What we ended up doing was cutting it by more than half. Instead of a 20% top up, we have a 6% top up. If it were up to me, I'd go back to the 20% because the evidence, and tons of evidence from sociologists and economists, lots of research has been done on this, including some at MSU, showing that it's had beneficial effects. So
what does 6% 6 up mean? What does that mean?
Well, so for a typical household, you might get a few $1,000s from your EITC. Let's say, just to make the arithmetic easy, that you are getting $1,000 from the federal EITC. Well, back under the old system of a 20% top up, you'd get $200 extra from Michigan. Under the 6% top up, you only get $60 extra for Michigan. And there are some people, depends upon the number of children, depends upon a bunch of things, but some people are getting like $4,000 or $5,000 of federal EITC. And if you're in that category, then the drop from a 20% state top up to a 6% state top up was several $100s, and not trivial, especially when we're talking about people generally, the population that is affected by the EITC. These are not people who are driving around in Cadillacs. This is lower income, lower wage working Americans, many of whom have been struggling for decades to make ends meet.
So, as you know, we have a relatively high poverty rate in the Upper Peninsula, especially in the more rural areas of the Peninsula. The child care tax credit, we hear a lot from our listeners and our readers about the child care costs in the UP, which
right,
are averaging out from our research at $600, $700, $800 a month. I forget offhand. Does that tax credit would also help folks getting the EITC, would it not?
Yes, absolutely. And so what we've seen, and I think this is generally a positive trend in public policy in America at a time when there have been lots of negative trends, but a positive trend is this increase in our efforts to help low-income families with children. Because often the evidence, what do they spend the money on? In some cases, it allows them to fix their car so that they can get to work more reliably. In some cases, it allows them to have a little bit extra so that they can go to a school or a community college or a training program, get an extra certificate, and help work their way up the ladder. So lots of good effects, both from the child care tax credit and from the EITC. They're both things that I think are good ideas that we ought to at least keep and maybe expand.
So the child care tax credit, from a tax policy point of view, also helps the middle class, that shrinking middle class that have children, right? They would probably.
Right.
Yeah.
And most of these things are designed such that they phase out over accommodating to a complicated schedule. But basically, here's the issue. If you want to give something to the low income folks, but you don't want to give it to the rich, well, if you have an abrupt cutoff where all of a sudden you get one more dollar and you lose your $3,000 benefit, that causes problems. So what we do for many, including these programs, there's a gradual phase out, which means that some people who we would call middle class get at least some of that. But the benefits have the largest effect down in what we would call lower middle or working poor.
So before we talk about the graduated income tax, talk a little bit about what are the major impacts and causes of the shrinking middle class in Michigan? What have been those influencers that people should know about? What's caused that?
A lot of things going on, but in Michigan, one thing that really stands out is that we were 60 years ago, 70 years ago, we were so heavy into manufacturing, and we were extraordinarily successful with it for several decades. But manufacturing has been shrinking as a percentage of the American economy since the 50s. And so the sector in which we were specialized, and it's not just, it's all sorts of manufacturing, but it's autos more than anything else. That sector has not done well for decades now. And also labor unions have become weaker. And those two things kind of go hand in hand, because labor unions, their traditional strength was in manufacturing sectors. And so what we've seen is a long-term decline. It used to be, I mean, there are lots of stories of the economic miracle of the middle of the 20th century, of ordinary people didn't have a college education, but went to work in a factory and made really good money. Those stories are very much less common now. Another thing that I think contributed was we in Michigan, I think, had been so successful with manufacturing 60 years ago that we got caught flat-footed as the economy was evolving toward much more of a high-tech, high-skill. You know, in the auto factories, the people who used to do simple repetitive tasks, installing the left rear door handle 107 times an hour, those people have been replaced by robots, and those robots are then operated by computer systems analysts. So it's a different skill set, and I think we haven't done nearly as good as we could have and should have to train our people for the new jobs that are evolving. So those are some of the stories about why the middle class has struggled. It's struggled all across the country, but the struggles have been more in Michigan than in an awful lot of other places.
I remember when I was a young man working in Washington and in the state legislature, which was a long time ago, I'm afraid I have to admit, the middle class was referred to as the family that worked in the auto industry, and they had a house in a nice suburb in Southeast Michigan, and they had a camp up north.
Right.
They had a pickup truck and a car, and they lived the life. That has sort of disappeared as the prototype of that.
That's there are still people who have a cottage up north,
yeah, right.
but yeah. It's much less common for it to be somebody who works in the auto factory. It's
oh yeah. So what about the graduated income tax? How's it work, and would that help solve some of these problems, and how?
In my view, a graduated income tax would help to solve some of the problems. Let me first describe the federal income tax, which a lot of people are familiar with. It is progressive, which means that it takes a higher percentage from high income people than from low income people. And one way that it does that is that it has what are called graduated rates. The rate on the first so many dollars of taxable income is 10%. And then it jumps up to 15%, and then it eventually gets up to 37%. Those numbers are much lower than they used to be. We used to have a much more progressive tax system than we have now, but still, that's how the federal system works. More than 30 states have a system like that with graduated rates. You know, in many states, it's something like 3% on the first so many dollars of taxable income, and then it jumps up to 5, and then to 7, and then something like that. We in Michigan, we're one of a handful of states that have a flat rate in the income tax. It's 4.25% on every dollar of taxable income. So that's the same rate on an extra dollar for the millionaire CEO as for the nurse's aide or the carpenter's assistant. So we have this flat rate, and there are proposals out there. And I've worked on some of these campaigns to try to educate the public about it. There are proposals that could raise more money to go to schools and roads and stuff, and yet give a tax cut to 90% of Michigan's people. The way you would do that would be to reduce somewhat the rate on the ordinary folks' income, and then have higher rates on those who have higher incomes. Now, I should say this may come as a surprise to some folks, but I'm advocating for something that would not be great for my own pocketbook. I'm not going to tell you how much I make, but the fact, for better or worse, is that PhD economists have done pretty well in the last 50 years. So I'm in the income bracket where if we were to enact a graduated income tax, I would pay somewhat more. But I take a broader view of what's good. It's not just what's good for my bank account, narrowly defined. It's what's good for the society in which I live. And that's why even though it would cost me, you know, depending upon the proposal, maybe a few $100 more a year, these proposals, I think, would be good for the state.
And in order for Michigan to do a graduated income tax, it would have to be a vote of the people?
That's right. The flat rate income tax is written into the 1963 Constitution. So in order to change that, you'd have to have a constitutional amendment. Now, there was a group of activists who tried very seriously. They put a big effort into getting it onto the 2020 ballot, but then along came COVID, and it's really hard to collect signatures if everybody's staying home. And so that didn't happen. Will it be on the ballot in 2022? I don't know the answer to that, but it has. We have taken public opinion surveys, and often public opinion it's usually favorable towards these things. Of course, I think the devil is always in the details. Yeah. And we know that if a proposal ever reached the ballot, there are well-funded organizations that would spend millions of dollars on often misleading attack ads to try to defeat it. And so whether it would pass, I don't know, but I do believe it has majority support.
When was the last time? What was it on the ballot in the 70s?
Yeah, I can't remember the exact year. I think it was on the ballot more than once, and it failed back in the 60s and 70s. We'd have to look up the year.
Yeah. Well, I think our listeners see why everyone refers to Dr. Ballard as the leading state expert on taxes and the economy, and his voice is and his knowledge is heard by many. So I would hope I can get you to come back again
I'd
and
love to.
do these sessions, folks in the UP to hear about some of these issues. So
That would be great.
Right.
We've talked about some interesting things here, but there's plenty of other stuff to talk
I
about.
was just going to say, I got a whole list of things we can talk for hours here, but I thought we'd break it up in chunks and we'll do another one real soon.
Well, this has been a good start. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Ballard, and we'll see you soon.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you.